What's up, everyone? Between my Pragmata sessions, I've been spiraling down a family manhwa rabbit hole. I stumbled across something top tier that is a total breath of fresh air. So, without wasting any more time, let's get started. The story opens on a picturesque, snowy Christmas Eve, where the holiday cheer is practically suffocating. A picture-perfect family strolls through the city, with a little girl practically bouncing off the walls with festive excitement. Walking past them is our protagonist, a brooding young man in a dark winter coat who looks like he completely missed the memo on holiday joy. He feels totally alienated by the festive crowds and the universal happiness around him, deciding it's best to just head home and escape the seasonal cheer. His lonely stroll is interrupted when he spots a Wish.com Santa kneeling in the snow. The Santa has a little cup and a sign practically begging people to make a wish. Feeling a spark of generosity, or perhaps just pity, our guy pulls out his wallet and drops a crisp bill into the cup. Immediately, he realizes he has made a terrible mistake. The Santa aggressively snatches the protagonist's hand with the grip strength of a desperate barnacle. The old man is overwhelmingly grateful and absolutely refuses to let go, demanding that the young man make a wish. Our hero is thoroughly creeped out and desperately tries to yeet his hand back, internally lamenting his terrible luck with weirdos. The street Santa doubles down, claiming he is literally locked out of Santa Village until he grants this kind stranger's wish. Realizing that humoring the man is his only ticket to freedom, the protagonist relents. He makes a surprisingly sincere and heartfelt wish. I want a wife as sweet as a rabbit and a daughter as cute as a mongoose. Our boy doesn't know it yet, but this Santa doesn't just say, ho, ho, ho. He also provides hoes, and he decides to grant our boy's wish with a little too much enthusiasm. Understandably terrified by this demonic Kris Kringle, our protagonist rips his hand away and absolutely books it down the street. He sprints away from the scene, completely convinced the man is insane, while the Santa screams, supportive, unhinged promises after him into the snowy night. Having successfully escaped the weirdest street encounter of his life, the exhausted protagonist boards a crowded, noisy subway train. Slumping into a seat, he stares longingly at a train advertisement featuring a smiling, perfect family. He closes his eyes to rest, mentally resigning himself to just wanting a normal, happy life like everyone else. Unfortunately for him, the universe is already setting his sarcastic wish into motion, as a strange, ominous purple mist begins to materialize in the darkness, signaling that his custom-ordered family might be arriving sooner than he thinks. Following his mysterious purple smoke subway abduction, our protagonist wakes up with a headache that feels like a hangover from another dimension. The bad news? He's in another world. The worst news? He's trapped in a wooden cage being dragged by a wagon, and nobody even said, "Oh, you're finally awake." Wearing nothing but his boxers, he starts to panic, realizing he wished for a stunning wife, but ended up as a buy one, get one free slave. Beside him, a rugged bearded man silently observes him, while a blonde prisoner covered in scars shares the cramped space. Looking around, our boy concludes that the vibe is very Middle Ages. Curious, he peeks outside and sees armored soldiers walking alongside the wagon, speaking a language that definitely isn't on Duolingo. Piecing together the foreign gibberish and the medieval setting, he arrives at a wild conclusion. He's been Isekai'd. Struggling to process the fact that he has no Wi-Fi, he curls up on the floor, trying to remember how to breathe. His attention shifts to a motionless prisoner in the corner, making him wonder if the guy has already checked out permanently. Carefully, our boy reaches out and touches the man's shoulder, whispers a quick, "My bad," and proceeds to steal the dead man's clothes. Exhausted, he lies back, recalling Santa's bizarre promise to grant his wish. Staring at the ceiling, he questions if he ever actually knew what happiness felt like. Time passes, and he loses track of how many days he's been stuck in this mobile prison. The wagon moves endlessly through dense forests, and he eventually realizes that everyone in the cage is being transported to find a buyer willing to pay for human lives. Finally, the sound of a lock opening breaks the silence. The prisoners are lined up like groceries as a village chief inspects them. Even though his pride is in the gutter, our boy feels a spark of hope. He figures since he's been hitting the gym, he'll be a top-tier pick and escape the wagon quickly. But reality hits him like a sack of bricks. After getting rejected by several villagers in a row, his face goes blank. Imagine being so mid that you can't even get hired as a slave. That's a new level of depression. As the wagon moves on again, he lies on the floor, wondering how his life reached this 0 stars, would not recommend rating. He remembers his mom telling him to live life to the fullest, but right now, he's just full of regret. Closing his eyes, he wonders if he can survive this ordeal. The image of Santa's creepy smile lingers in his mind. Pushed to his limit, he curses this happiness and rejects both worlds entirely. He's ready to give up on everything to stop the pain, but then his deep-seated desire for a beautiful wife resurfaces, giving him a reason to keep grinding. Just as he finds a bit of calm, a piece of fresh bread is poked through the bars. A kind, gorgeous woman is standing before the cage, offering food to the prisoners. As she places the bread in his hands, a small girl peeks out from behind her skirt, looking at him with wide eyes. Surprised by this sudden act of humanity, he stares at the pair, completely illuminated by the sunlight. The scene shifts to a serene, sunlit cabin tucked away in the forest. Inside, a young woman and an angelic little blonde girl share a very meager meal at a wooden table. Noticing the child eating carefully, the woman selflessly slides her own bowl across the table, encouraging the girl to eat more. However, the sweet child refuses to take it, softly pointing out that if she is hungry, the woman must be starving too. Touched by the little girl's pure empathy, the woman warmly agrees that they are in this together, and they decide to share the humble meal equally. This brief moment of domestic peace is violently shattered by loud, aggressive pounding on the cabin door. It's the village elder, who doesn't even bother coming inside to deliver his terrible news. He casually announces that the local village council has played unwanted matchmaker. They have officially decided to force the woman to marry one of the newly arrived slaves. To make matters worse, she is ordered to put on her best clothes and report to the village entrance by dawn, to be dragged back up the mountain with her new husband. Once the elder leaves, the cabin is filled with a suffocating tension. The woman clutches the little girl in absolute terror, spiraling into a panic attack. She is absolutely petrified of being forced up the mountain to face physical abuse once again. While the urge to run away is strong, she realizes escape is practically impossible. More importantly, as she looks down at the child beside her, she knows she can never just abandon her to face the dark alone. However, her quiet moment of resolve is suddenly interrupted. As if sensing the heavy, terrifying atmosphere in the room, the little girl's massive eyes well with tears. She looks up and bursts into loud, heartbreaking sobs right then and there, her wails echoing helplessly through the bleak, empty cabin. As she watches the little girl sleep, clutching a teddy bear, the woman's mind drifts to her own incredibly tragic backstory. Talk about a raw deal. She recalls how her own father sold her off for the ridiculously low price of a single rabbit pelt. Her arrival at the cabin was nothing short of a horror story. On the very first day, she met her arranged husband. Before she could even unpack her single, tiny bundle of belongings, the monstrous man brutally beat her simply because she arrived slightly later than scheduled. As she lay bruised and battered on the floor of that hellhole, the only comfort she received was from the man's young daughter, who gently approached to console her. But hey, the universe occasionally serves up some delightfully swift justice. That very same day, the horrible husband went out to the hunting grounds and was promptly devoured by the local wolves, leaving nothing behind but a bloody boot. While his transition into dog food was undeniably a massive relief for the woman and the child, it left the two of them entirely alone, bound by shared hardship and facing a terrifying, uncertain future. To set the stage, the woman reflects on the harsh reality of her village. A widow without a husband is essentially a defenseless sheep wandering outside a protective fence. Her relief over her abusive husband's death by wolf mauling is heavily overshadowed by the crushing anxiety of what will happen to her and the child next. Returning to the present, she and the little girl are walking hand in hand through the village under the bright sun. The child points excitedly at a large wooden carriage in the middle of the area. She probably isn't thinking about cheap labor. She's just a kid excited by a big, flashy wagon. The woman looks over and gets a shock when she sees the protagonist locked inside. However, Seeing the caged man doesn't just spark simple pity, it triggers a violent, traumatic flashback. She is suddenly pulled back to a memory of her deceased husband, physically abusing her, shattering plates, and viciously berating her for ruining his appetite, while she cowers on the floor, shielding the terrified child. Shaking off the nightmare, she looks at the starving, humiliated prisoner and feels a deep, unspoken solidarity. Breaking through the protagonist's spiral of shame and insignificance, the young woman steps up to the iron bars. Her gentle, warm gaze cuts through his despair as she offers him a small woven basket of bread. Before he can even process this angelic act of kindness, the moment is ruined by the local village chief and another man who step in to shoo her away. They order her to return to her cabin and leave the business to them. She obediently walks away, and the little girl peeks over her shoulder for one last, sympathetic look at the prisoner. Once they are gone, our boy absolutely inhales the bread in silence, desperate for any nourishment. His meal is quickly interrupted by armored soldiers who unlock the cage, drag him out without an ounce of ceremony, and toss him face first into the dirt. It is time for the official paperwork. The village chief and the soldiers gather around for a bizarre ritual. A heavily armored knight grabs the hand of other slaves and slices it open with a dagger, letting their blood drip onto a strange leather document. The parchment immediately glows with an intense blue light, leaving our exhausted hero deeply startled and wondering if he has just witnessed real magic. After observing the glowing contract, the knight whispered to the elder about something, and then the elder looks at our boy. With the blood ritual complete, the glowing contract is handed over to the grumpy village leader, officially sealing the deal. The soldiers then leave our protagonist kneeling in the grass. The scene shifts back to the young woman, where a large, heavy sack of provisions is unceremoniously dropped onto the floorboards. A stern but pragmatic, older village matron orders the young woman to take the supplies with her. She explains that the village is providing them with this food and basic necessities to help them get by for a little while. However, there's a catch. It is strictly a loan, and they will eventually have to pay it all back. The matron then gives the young woman the full rundown on her newly assigned partner. First, she warns her that the man doesn't speak a single word of their language, so communication is going to be a major struggle. Furthermore, the soldiers who processed him suspect he is nothing more than a powerless commoner. But the matron quickly offers a massive silver lining to calm the young woman's nerves. She points out that while the man's face might look a bit rough and rugged, his hands are surprisingly soft. To the matron, this lack of heavy calluses strongly indicates he has never done a day of brutal labor, and more importantly, he has probably never hit anyone in his life. She assures the young lady that she can finally relax, as he definitely doesn't seem like the type to raise his hand against a woman. Being bluntly honest, the older woman reveals exactly why the village intervened in the first place. It turns out the entire town absolutely despised the young woman's dead husband. The only reason they ever tolerated the awful man was out of sheer necessity. He was the village's sole hunter, and they desperately needed someone to range the dangerous forest. With him gone, the council simply decided to assign her a substitute husband. The matron suggests that as long as this new guy works hard and takes up the hunting mantle, the young woman might actually get to live a comfortable, stable life. Overwhelmed by her traumatic past and terrified of the unknown, the young woman passionately replies that she isn't hoping for luxury or a comfortable life. Clutching her hands to her chest, she confesses that she doesn't care about living well. All she truly wants is a normal, non-violent man who won't hurt her, so she and her little girl can simply exist in peace. Her desperate pleas are eventually cut short by aggressive, loud knocks at the cabin door. The woman instantly panics, clutching her child tightly as an elder demands entry. The door swings open to reveal the elder acting as the world's pushiest matchmaker, dragging our bewildered protagonist inside the cabin. Inside, the boy stands awkwardly, trying to process his new reality as a purchased slave, while the woman and her daughter cower on the floor in absolute terror. She stares up at him, her heart racing as she assumes this towering stranger is going to be just as terrifying as her last husband. As our boy looks down at his terrified new family, a light bulb finally goes off. He recognizes her as the incredibly kind woman who offered him bread through the cage bars earlier. It seems our boy has indeed found his baddie, but his relief is quickly replaced by concern when he notices she is trembling uncontrollably in fear. Before he can even attempt to comfort her, the overly enthusiastic village elder intervenes, complaining that the two of them are standing way too stiffly for an engaged couple. The old man grabs the boy by the arm and hauls him over to the cowering woman. Without asking either of them for permission, the elder abruptly snatches both of their hands and mashes them together, proudly declaring that they finally look like a real couple. Having done his good deed for the day, the matchmaking elder leaves, stranding the two of them in an incredibly tense and awkward hand-holding session. Standing there looking at this beautiful, terrified woman, our protagonist's mind suddenly flashes back to that fateful, snowy night. He remembers the psychotic street Santa screaming about finding him a wife with a pure heart and a beautiful daughter who will respect her father. He looks at the woman's face, comparing her fragile innocence to a cute, defenseless white rabbit. Then he looks down at the sweet little girl, comparing her to an equally adorable, wide-eyed woodland critter. Whether it's a mongoose, a squirrel, or a quokka, the cuteness is off the charts. As the sheer irony of the situation hits him like a freight train, he realizes the terrifying truth. That crazy Santa was the real deal, and he actually granted his wish perfectly. Inside the cabin, the two women remain huddled together, absolutely terrified of the towering stranger before them. Meanwhile, our boy is completely lost in his own frustrations. He reflects on the sheer absurdity of his situation, angrily wondering why granting a simple wish for a family required kidnapping him and throwing him into another world. A dark, fiery red aura of sheer resentment literally begins to radiate from him as he makes a solemn vow. If he ever crosses paths with that deranged street Santa again, he is definitely going to kill him. Unfortunately, he doesn't realize his intense, murderous aura is scaring his new family half to death. The next day, our protagonist finds himself following two local villagers deep into the sunlit forest. Unable to understand a single word they are saying, he's just trying to go with the flow. Suddenly, one of the villagers turns around and extends a hand. Confused, but trying to be polite, our boy accepts what he thinks is a simple greeting. However, the villager maliciously squeezes down with a crushing grip. Assuming this is some sort of rough, local test of strength, our boy refuses to be intimidated. Tired of being underestimated in this new world, he squeezes back, instantly crushing the man's fingers with a loud crack. The villager drops to his knees, screaming in agony. Seeing our boy squeeze the other guy's hand, the elder is impressed and nods in approval, then happily hands him a wooden bow. Observing the weapon, our boy realizes the elder wants to teach him how to hunt. Right on cue, a cute little white rabbit hops into a nearby bush, completely unaware of the danger. The elder frantically points at it, demanding an immediate shot. There is just one problem. Our boy has literally never held a bow in his life. Nervous, he pulls the bowstring back, trying to remember what Olympic archers look like on TV. Suddenly, as his stance stabilizes, the arrow begins to glow with an intense, blinding, blue, magical aura. He releases the string, and instead of a normal shot, the arrow fires like a devastating magical laser beam. It blows a massive, smoking trench straight through the forest floor. The rabbit, completely unharmed by the weapon of mass destruction that just missed it, casually hops away. Both the elder and our protagonist are left squatting on the ground, utterly speechless at the absurd, explosive power. Still in shock and trying to process his unexpected magical abilities, the forest goes quiet. He then notices his new wife and the little girl approaching calmly through the trees carrying a basket. Seeing them, his heart skips a beat as he takes in the sight of his new family. The hunting lesson takes a pause as the women lay out a blanket on the grass. Soon, they are all sitting together for a simple picnic on the ground. As the woman gently feeds her daughter, she timidly offers him a warm bowl of stew. He accepts it, quietly eating his meal while observing the fragile, beautiful family that fate has inexplicably given him. While quietly eating the bowl of hot stew, the protagonist reflects on his incredibly lonely past. He realizes that from middle school until he turned 33, waking up entirely alone was the only reality he had ever known. Looking at the woman and child sharing a meal, He marvels at the fact that he finally got the family he always wished for, even if the method was completely twisted. Letting go of his previous anger, he looks up at the sky and silently thanks to Santa for giving him a family to protect. So much for seeking revenge on the street, Santa. The journey home continues along a bright forest trail. Our boy leads the way carrying a massive, heavy sack of supplies on his back, while the exhausted woman and child struggle to keep up behind him. Thinking about how a true protector must immediately jump into action, he stops walking and turns around to help them. He crouches down to their level, gently telling them not to be scared because he is going to hold them for a moment. Unfortunately, because he doesn't speak their language, his sudden approach terrifies them. The little girl begins to cry, and the panicked woman begs him to spare the child, desperately offering to do whatever he wants to keep her safe. Realizing they are misunderstanding his intentions but unable to explain himself, he politely says, "Pardon me for a moment." He reaches out and smoothly scoops the startled little girl into one arm, and then effortlessly lifts the shocked woman into his other arm. Now carrying both of them plus the giant supply sack on his back, he stands up with absolute ease. The woman is left completely stunned and speechless as he casually tells them to hold on tight and resumes walking down the trail. As he moves forward, our boy is amazed by his newly acquired physical strength. He notes that even while carrying all the luggage and 2 human beings, the load doesn't feel heavy at all. Filled with a new sense of purpose, he firmly resolves to learn the local language and figure out how to hunt properly so he can fill their new home with meat. Sensing his gentle nature, the young woman's tension finally melts away. She rests her head comfortably against his chest and firmly grips his shirt with her hands. Feeling her subtle, trusting squeeze, our boy continues their walk through the forest in a peaceful silence. After being guided through the woods by an older villager, our protagonist finally arrives at his new residence. However, calling it a home is a massive stretch. Staring at the crumbling wooden structure with gaping holes in the roof, he realizes this shack is probably going to be even colder than his drafty old rooftop room back on Earth. Naturally, he absolutely hates the cold, making this a less than ideal real estate situation. Pushing the creaky wooden door open, he steps inside, expecting at least a basic shelter. Instead, he is left completely confused, while his young wife is absolutely horrified by the scene before them. Tears instantly stream down her face, prompting our boy to gently ask why she is crying. Overwhelmed by despair, the desperate young lady turns and runs out of the shack. Standing in the doorway of the completely empty living room, the grim reality of the situation hits the protagonist as he realizes the place has been looted. However, it is the young woman who breaks down and voices the full, devastating extent of the theft. Collapsed on the grass outside, she tearfully explains that while she was away dealing with the village business, the opportunistic locals came and completely ransacked the house. They stripped the place bare, taking the supplies, the tools, the hose, the hammers, and even the hunting bow and arrows. The situation is extremely critical. Without any tools to repair the drafty walls, they are going to freeze as the weather gets colder. And worse, without a single weapon left, they have absolutely no way to defend themselves if a wild beast decides to attack right now. Walking out into the yard, he finds the young lady collapsed on the grass, crying uncontrollably over their doomed fate. To calm things down, he quietly sits beside her on the ground. In a tender, friendly gesture, he reaches out and gently pats the top of her head. Softly, he tells his startled wife not to worry, promising that she won't ever have to sleep out in the cold. Radiating calm confidence, a warm smile forms on his face as he looks into her teary eyes and assures her, "I'll protect you." The young lady's mind is still a whirlwind of cruel doubts and crushing anxiety about surviving in this hostile environment. Yet even though they don't share the same language, his affectionate, grounded presence works a tiny miracle. As the dread slowly fades from her eyes, she looks up at the giant stranger and silently wonders to herself, with so much to fear, why does she feel so incredibly relieved just being beside him?
Sorry for the sudden voice change, y'all. I got diagnosed with acute bronchitis. Doctors said the only cure is viewers liking the video and hitting the subscribe button. But for real though, if y'all vibe with this voice, we can keep using it from now on. If you prefer the old one, I can switch back anytime. This one was just cheaper than the previous one. Anyway, enough of me yapping, let's get to recapping. Kneeling beside the crying woman on the grass, the protagonist feels helpless because the language barrier prevents him from comforting her with words. Despite having no supplies and nowhere to turn, he refuses to give up now that he finally has a family to protect. As he gently tries to comfort her, a sudden noise interrupts the moment. The little blonde girl comes sprinting toward them, crying out as she throws her arms around the young woman. Watching the brave child looking at him to protect her mother figure, a rush of questions floods the protagonist's mind. He wonders whose child she actually is, why the woman was kind enough to give him bread earlier, and what kind of deep suffering caused her to cry so brokenly. Despite the lingering mysteries, he makes a firm, silent vow. If they try living together, they can absolutely become a real, happy family. Pulling them both into a warm embrace, he mentally promises to become such a good husband and father that neither of them will ever cry again or regret becoming his family. As the sun sets, the scene shifts inside the bleak, empty wooden cabin. Any progress they made outside seems to have vanished. The trio sits on the hard floor, with the woman and child keeping a very safe distance from him. Sitting cross-legged, he sighs, lamenting that they are practically back to square one, though he is slightly relieved that they are at least just wary now, instead of outright terrified. Realizing he needs to take the first step to break the ice and bridge the gap, he gets an idea. To initiate communication, he points directly at his face and slowly pronounces his name, Kim Ju-hwan. After he repeats it, a spark of understanding lights up the young woman's face. Encouraged, he extends a hand toward her and asks for her name. Though momentarily confused, she points to herself and gently replies, Lizzie. Ju-hwan happily repeats it and tells her it's a really pretty name. He then turns his attention to the little girl sitting safely near Lizzie, asking for her name as well. When the child just stares back silently, he quickly deduces that the young orphan might not even have a name yet. Placing a gentle hand on the little girl's head, he decides to give her a very special name, Dorothy. He names her after the brave girl from The Wizard of Oz, sincerely wishing that she too will go on grand adventures, meet many friends, and ultimately find her own true happiness. Testing the sound out, she softly repeats the word Dorothy and flashes a bright, happy smile. Not gonna lie, if I were the author, I would have renamed her something less like a 73-year-old grandma from Kansas. Sometime later, outside the cabin, Ju-hwan is hard at work bringing an axe down to chop firewood. Hiding behind a nearby tree, Lizzie quietly watches him, thinking about what an incredibly strange man he is. She notes that even though he has a much rougher body and hands compared to her dead husband, he treats her with unexpected kindness instead of hitting her. To her, his entire aura feels completely different from people she have known. She softly whispers his name, Ju-hwan, recalling how he speaks to them with a warm smile despite his deep, low voice. Admitting to herself that she has never received this level of kindness in her entire life, she can't help but wonder why this giant stranger is being so good to her. Her deep thoughts are interrupted when Ju-hwan spots her spying on him. He stops chopping, smiles, and enthusiastically waves while calling out her name. Staring at him from a distance, Lizzie focuses on his dark features and remembers an unsettling piece of gossip. Word had spread that an enemy nation was celebrating because they had successfully summoned a legendary hero who possessed black hair and black eyes. As Ju-hwan calmly walks toward her, the imposing silhouette of the legendary hero flashes in her mind. She briefly panics, wondering if he could be the hero, before quickly talking herself out of the crazy theory. She reasons that someone that incredibly important would absolutely not be stuck out here in their miserable village, and the whole summoning story is likely just a baseless rumor anyway. When he finally steps right in front of her, she gets a close-up look at his face in the light. She realizes that his hair and eyes aren't actually black at all, but rather a warm shade of brown. Letting out a long sigh, Lizzie feels a sudden wave of relief wash over her. However, she immediately catches herself, confused by her own comforting feelings. Holding her chest, she wonders why she feels so incredibly relieved to be around him when they literally just met today. Feeling awkward, Lizzie trembles slightly, blushing as she turns her face away to hide her embarrassment. Captivated by her cute, shy reaction, Ju-hwan shifts into a gentler posture. He reaches out and gently places his large hand on his wife's head, softly stroking her hair. Lizzie is completely taken aback. She is entirely unaccustomed to receiving this kind of gentle touch from a man. The only time her former husband's hand ever made contact with her was to deliver harsh, painful blows. Yet, Juhan continues patting her head in a careful, deeply respectful manner. Closing her eyes, Lizzie completely relaxes into the sensation, secretly hoping that he will keep stroking her hair. The outsider leans in slightly, feeling his own face warm up as he becomes hyper-aware of how incredibly close they are. Lizzie lifts her gaze, looking up at him with a shy, inviting expression. Caught up in the intensely romantic mood, they both close their eyes and begin to lean closer together. After making me proud, Juhan's eyes fly open. He abruptly pulls back, shattering the romantic moment. They both step back from each other, freezing as their faces burn bright red in extreme embarrassment. Desperately trying to hide his awkwardness, Juhan turns his gaze away and immediately grabs an empty wooden bucket lying on the grass. Using the bucket as a convenient excuse, he quickly speed walks away, leaving a heavily blushing, completely flustered Lizzie behind in the yard. Already deep in the quiet forest with his bucket, protagonist walks along, mentally kicking himself. He feels completely foolish, wondering what on earth she must think of him after he panicked and ran away. He stops, stressing over the fact that they literally just met and got married today and can't even speak the same language. Unsure of how to act when he gets back, he briefly considers just pretending the kiss never happened. Suddenly, he freezes mid-step. Looking at the darkening sky above the dense trees, he realizes that in this flustered rush, he has wandered way too far from the cabin. Just then, a low, eerie rustling noise echoes from the bushes nearby. Determined not to take any unnecessary risks in an unfamiliar forest, Juhan decides to quickly get the water and head straight back home. However, a sudden, terrifying shiver runs down his spine. He looks up and his blood runs cold. A gigantic, menacing black wolf with glowing red eyes is aggressively blocking his path, growling and ready to attack. Facing the massive, snarling beast, Juhan slowly steps back as the sheer terror of the situation finally sinks in. Dropping his wooden bucket, he realizes just how unforgiving and dangerous this fantasy forest truly is. With no way to outrun a monster of that size, he desperately grabs a thick fallen branch from the dirt to defend himself. Without hesitation, the gigantic wolf lunges at him with its massive jaws wide open. Acting on pure survival instinct, Juhan shoves the branch horizontally into the beast's mouth to block the fatal bite. With a desperate roar, he drove his fist straight into the wolf's face. The punch landed hard, but instead of backing down, the beast only grew even more enraged. Snarling violently, the wolf used its overwhelming strength to rip the branch from Juhan's hands and throw it aside. Juhan staggered back, breathing heavily as adrenaline surged through every part of his body. Ignoring his fear, he charged forward again, preparing to throw another punch. But the wolf was faster. The beast suddenly snapped its jaws shut around Juhan's arm. Agonizing pain shot through his entire body. Juhan squeezed his eyes shut as it felt like his arm and his entire body had been set on fire. But then, something strange happened. Juhan slowly opened his eyes. Flames were erupting from his right hand. Orange fire swirled violently around his arm, burning fiercely without harming him at all. Juhan stared at it in complete disbelief. For a brief moment, his mind froze in shock. But this wasn't the time to stand there confused. Instinct took over. Juhan clenched his burning fist and started swinging with everything he had, and with a final strike, devastating blast does the job perfectly. The massive wolf crashes to the ground, completely lifeless, with smoke rising from its scorched body. Completely exhausted, Juhan lays in the grass and stares in utter disbelief at his right hand. Remembering the glowing blue light from the village's blood contract, the pieces finally click into place. Looking at the smoking monster he just one-shotted, he realizes he isn't just an ordinary powerless guy after all. He really is the overpowered protagonist of this new world. Stretching out his arm, Juhan attempts to summon the magical flames again by dramatically shouting classic RPG spells. From Hellfire to Mega Flare, he tries different poses, but absolutely nothing happens. Defeated and feeling incredibly foolish, he lies back on the grass. He checks his hand again where the beast bite him. To his absolute shock, the brutal wound hasn't just partially healed, it has completely vanished. He concludes that his magic is definitely real and not an illusion. He just needs to figure out how to control it. He imagines Lizzie and little Dorothy smiling warmly. If he can master this overpowered magic, he can easily become an elite hunter, make plenty of money, and provide a comfortable, well-fed life for his new family. He even considers the possibility of learning healing magic, noting how incredibly useful it would be to survive in a rustic village that doesn't have any hospitals. However, thinking about family causes dark memories to resurface. He remembers his childhood after his parents passed away. Instead of comforting him, his relatives treated him like a plague. They whispered cruel things behind his back, labeling him a cursed child who brought bad luck to everyone around him. Pushing those painful memories aside, a determined Juhan refocuses on the present. Turning his attention to the massive dead monster, he decides to haul it back before scavengers arrive. Lifting the giant beast onto his back with his newfound strength, he begins the trek home under the moonlight. As he walks, he mentally thanks his grandfather. His grandpa was a butcher by trade and made Juhan help out from a young age, knowledge that is going to prove incredibly useful when he processes the heavy wolf meat tomorrow. Meanwhile, inside the dimly lit cabin, Lizzie is carefully cooking a meal over the fireplace. She asks little Dorothy to hand her a wooden bowl. The child happily complies and receives a gentle, affectionate pat on the head, leaving Dorothy smiling brightly and glowing with joy. Eagerly waiting for Juhan to return, the energetic little girl runs over to peek out the dark window. Suddenly, a terrifying giant wolf head appears right at the glass. Unaware that it's just Juhan carrying his hunt, Dorothy screams in absolute terror and bursts into tears. Hearing the child's panic scream, Lizzie's maternal instincts instantly kick in. She drops what she is doing, snatches up a sharp kitchen knife, and fiercely sprints toward the door, shouting Dorothy's name and fully prepared to fight whatever monster is threatening her new daughter. As Lizzie charges out the door, clutching the kitchen knife, fully prepared to fight for her family, she freezes at the sight before her. Juhan is standing right in the yard, exhausted but alive, having just dropped the massive monster's corpse onto the dirt. Seeing that her giant husband is completely unharmed, the sheer relief instantly drains the adrenaline and strength from her body. The knife slips from her trembling fingers and falls harmlessly into the grass. She frantically rushes forward, desperately checking his body for injuries. Before a confused Juhan can even try to explain what happened, Lizzie throws her arms around him in a tight, desperate hug, sobbing into his chest. Little Dorothy runs up right behind her, latching onto his leg and wailing just as loudly. Completely overwhelmed by their intense reaction, Juhan gently places a hand on Lizzie's head. Realizing just how terrified they were of losing him, he silently vows never to put his new family through this kind of fear again. The next morning, the panic has faded and the cabin is peaceful under the bright daylight. Juhan is already hard at work outside, using the very kitchen knife Lizzie dropped last night to butcher the massive wolf on a makeshift stone block. As sweat pours down his face, he realizes that butchering a giant monster is much harder than it looks, reflecting on how his grandfather used to make processing meat look incredibly easy. As he finishes separating the heavy cuts of meat, Lizzie steps out of the cabin carrying a large wooden tub. Smiling warmly, she walks over and gestures for him to place the freshly processed meat inside. Grateful for the help, Juhan decides to make another attempt at bridging the language gap. He struggles for a moment, scratching his head and stammering awkwardly as he tries his best to express a sincere thank you. The instant he spoke, the girl's eyes widened slightly before her face lit up with excitement. With a warm smile, she gently repeated the word back to him, correcting his awkward pronunciation. After hearing the correct pronunciation, Juhan softly repeated the word once again while looking at her. Under the warm sunlight filtering through the trees, the two quietly smiled at each other, slowly beginning to bridge the gap between their two worlds. To him, it is probably just basic kindness, but for Lizzie, those words hit with terrifying force. She stares at him in shock before quietly telling him he is welcome, barely able to get the words out properly. Even after he turns away, she remains standing there in a daze. Inside her thoughts, she admits something heartbreaking. Nobody has ever thanked her before. Not her parents, not her siblings, nobody. All she did was bring him a wooden bucket. Yet Juhan treated her with genuine appreciation, like her effort actually mattered. She turns and follows the protagonist as he leads the way back to a rustic wooden cabin. As she walks behind him, her thoughts are consumed by a mixture of curiosity and insecurity. She begins to wonder about his past, questioning if she is the first woman he has ever treated with such care, or if he has been this tender with others before her. She contemplates whether other women have felt this same intense attraction to him, and these lingering questions cause a sudden, unexplained ache in her heart. Still flushed, she admits to herself that her own emotional reaction feels strange, realizing she is so overwhelmed by his presence that she feels like she might cry. Once they are inside the dimly lit cabin, Juhan sets the wooden bucket on the floor. Lizzie watches him closely as he casually picks up the meat. She observes him with a sense of bewilderment, noting internally that tasks like this are traditionally considered a woman's duty. She watches him perform the chore willingly, quietly wondering why he takes on these menial tasks so naturally, as if it is entirely normal for him to do the work instead of leaving it to her. Ju-hwan, still holding the meat, turns his attention to Lizzie and begins to lean in close to her face. Flustered by his sudden proximity, Lizzie begins to panic internally. Convinced he is about to kiss her, she tightly shuts her eyes and braces herself. However, Ju-hwan simply leans over and presses a gentle kiss to her forehead. She steps back, embarrassed by her own expectations. Confused by her reaction, Kim Jong-un moves closer once more. Determined not to misunderstand again, she keeps her eyes wide open, only for him to surprise her with a soft kiss on the lips. She freezes completely. Nearby, little Dorothy watches silently from the doorway. Mortified at being caught, Lizzie quickly runs back outside the house. Later, Kim Kardashian picks up the damn meat and heads down the path, with the little girl trailing behind him. Dorothy gestures to him, wanting to help carry the heavy load. He gives her a gentle smile, silently expressing his gratitude. However, Dorothy suddenly looks disappointed, which confuses him. He wonders what is wrong until it dawns on him that he hasn't called her by her name even once. Realizing his oversight, he stops right in the middle of the path, looks at her, and warmly expresses his thanks while finally addressing her by name. Radiant from the acknowledgement, Dorothy rushes forward and helps him move the heavy bucket, which is almost as big as she is, pushing it with all her strength. Meanwhile, back inside the cabin, Lizzie strokes the thick, dark fur of the beast's pelt with the slow, calculated grace of a supervillain petting a lap cat. She might look deeply moved on the outside, but internally, her brain is just making loud cha-ching noises. She's already running the numbers on the medieval black market, liquidating his hard-earned hunting assets, and drafting a flawless 10-step plan to fence the rug, grab the cash, and flee the country with me so we can live out our best, filthy rich lives. Alright, back to the real story. From where protagonist stands, the young man finds it rather odd that she is choosing to dry the smelly hide indoors. Suddenly, Ju-hwan understands the reason behind it, realizing the pelt holds tremendous value. Excited, Dorothy sits beside the hide and boops the dead wolf's nose. The sight draws genuine laughter from Lizzie, while Ju-hwan smiles in quiet satisfaction. The day passes peacefully. Now we get to see how the meat is pickled. Focused, Ju-hwan carefully observes the process, eager to learn the proper techniques. Lizzie's happiness over the animal fat relieves him as he realizes his efforts were not wasted. With a new goal beginning to form, Ju-hwan feels the pressure to master basic survival skills. Determined, he decides to quickly learn the local trading system to secure their future. Without any further ado, he stands, ready to return to work. Before he steps out, Lizzie rushes over behind him in panic state. Confused, Ju-hwan asks if she wants him to rest longer, assuring her that he is recovered and feels no pain. Gently touching her shoulder, he tells her not to worry and promises not to overexert himself. Lizzie watches silently as he walks out. Once in the forest, Ju-hwan studies the trees and decides they are suitable for woodcutting practice. He had heard that oak was the best firewood, but first he needed to figure out which tree was actually an oak. Gripping the axe firmly, he admits he has never done anything like this before and is relying purely on brute strength. Without delay, he raises the axe, but his dumbass loses his grip mid-swing and sends the axe flying. After more than an hour, Ju-hwan finally returns with an absurd amount of firewood piled across his back, like he's trying to supply an entire village for winter. The sight immediately leaves Lizzie and Dorothy worried. The moment he drops the load and sits down, completely drained from the labor, Lizzie quickly moves to his side. Still concerned despite his insistence that he's fine, she gently begins massaging his sore arm. Touched by her concern, Ju-hwan quietly thanks her, unable to hide the small smile forming on his face. Seeing him smile, Dorothy suddenly dashes across the wooden floor, dunks both hands into a basin of water, and rushes back before splashing it all over Ju-hwan, leaving the poor man completely soaked and utterly confused. Lizzie instantly panics at the child's behavior, but Dorothy just stares at him with sparkling eyes, clearly waiting for praise like she just performed a legendary support skill. Realizing her innocent little brain was only trying to help him, Ju-hwan gently pats her head and thanks her kindly. Encouraged by the successful mission, Dorothy immediately runs off to grab even more water while Ju-hwan desperately tries to stop her before she upgrades from helpful child to human flood disaster. The whole scene finally makes Lizzie burst into laughter, and seeing her laugh causes a smile to slowly spread across Ju-hwan's face as well, because deep down, this is the happiness he wants for them. Even my single ass is smiling at this scene. Night soon falls over the isolated mountain home, smoke steadily rising from the chimney. Gathered around the table, the family shares a warm meal together. Exhausted from the day, Dorothy eventually falls asleep right beside the table, which makes both Lizzie and Juhan giggle softly at the peaceful sight. Carefully, Juhan lifts the sleeping child into his arms and carries her to bed while Lizzie begins cleaning up. Moving slowly, he tucks Dorothy in and makes sure not to disturb her sleep. But when he returns, he notices Lizzie quietly soaking a cloth in water. As he tries to walk past her, Lizzie suddenly grabs his hand and stops him right in front of her. Then she gives him that deadly look capable of deleting a man's remaining innocence on the spot. Somewhere out there, that Jewish Santa is probably smiling proudly at his handiwork, and honestly, I need to track that man down immediately. If any of you manage to contact him first, let me know. Overwhelmed by shyness, Lizzie kept telling herself that she mustn't be nervous. This was a wife's duty after all. But even getting close to Juhan and feeling the warmth of his firm abs beneath her fingertips made her face burn with embarrassment, forcing her to look away. Sensing her nerves, Juhan gave her a gentle, reassuring smile, though that only made her even more flustered. Seeing the state she was in, he softly placed his large hand over hers, calming her trembling fingers. Their eyes met with quiet affection, and leaning closer, he whispered softly, "Let's do the deed." Taking her hand, Juhan guided her away from the living area and into the darkened bedroom. Beneath the faint glow of a lantern, he gently eased Lizzie back onto the bed. Hovering over her affectionately, he leaned forward and blew out the lantern's flame. Hidden beneath the cover of darkness, he leaned in and shared a tender kiss with her. The moment their lips met, he was completely captivated by how unbelievably soft they felt. A deep sense of awe washed over him as the reality finally settled in. This beautiful woman was truly his wife. Thinking of her and little Dorothy sleeping peacefully nearby, he makes a silent, heartfelt prayer. He hopes they never leave this world before he does, and that they remain happy until his very last moment. For Lizzie, this peaceful night is a stark contrast to her traumatic past. Growing up as a peasant child crammed into a single room with her parents, there was no soundproofing to hide what happened at night. She knew exactly what went on in the dark, but instead of love, she experienced terror. She vividly remembers her father's terrifying booming voice. Hiding under her covers in fear, she would listen helplessly to her mother's painful sobbing until the break of dawn. That sickening past left her constantly afraid, living with the deep-seated fear that her mother's tragic fate would one day become her own future. Suddenly, Lizzie's eyes flutter open, pulled away from her dark memories. She looks around the dim cabin, noticing the fireplace, and realizes she is lying comfortably in bed rather than on the hard floor where she originally fell asleep. Surprised by his tender care, she notices that Juhan has even offered his own arm as a pillow for her. Looking at Juhan and Dorothy sleeping peacefully beside her, a profound sense of relief washes over her. She realizes that the nights spent between a husband and wife do not have to be scary after all. The world has been changing for the better ever since she met this man. Just then, Juhan stirs in his sleep. Still half awake, he murmurs softly and pulls Lizzie and Dorothy even closer into a tight, warm embrace. Caught off guard by the sudden closeness, Lizzie blushes deeply. Her heart races so fast it feels like it might burst, and a warm, tingly feeling fills her chest as she rests safely in his arms. Morning sunlight fills the cabin, waking Juhan from his sleep. Basking in the peaceful morning, he carefully sits up, pulling the blanket over Dorothy to keep her warm without waking her, and gives her hair a gentle pat before getting out of bed. Lizzie was already awake and about to carry a heavy metal bucket when Juhan smoothly stepped in and grabbed the handle before she could, catching her slightly off guard. Effortlessly lifting the heavy bucket, he poured the water into a large iron pot. While busy with the task, he suddenly heard Lizzie's soft voice behind him. Turning around, he saw her standing there with an intensely flustered expression as she shyly repeated a certain word. After hearing it, Juhan repeated the word back to her, only to make her face turn even redder. The phrase apparently meant, "Honey, did you sleep well?" Watching her reaction, Juhan grew increasingly confused about why she was so embarrassed. But then it slowly dawned on him that the word he had just casually repeated probably meant something along the lines of dear, darling, or honey. Feeling slightly awkward now, he asked what he should call her instead, suggesting that maybe he should just use her name, Lizzie. However, still blushing furiously, she softly asked him to keep calling her dear. Happy to oblige, Juhan smiles and deliberately says the word dear again. Lizzie is so embarrassed that she covers her face with both hands and quickly turns her back to him to hide her flustered expression. Finding her shy reaction incredibly adorable, Juhan feels the urge to tease her a little more. He gently pokes her shoulder from behind, playfully asking his dear to look at him, which causes her to flinch in surprise. The romantic tension is abruptly broken when Dorothy wakes up. Still half asleep and literally dreaming of flying meat, she rubs her eye and groggily mumbles about meat. Driven by pure hunger, she scrambles out of bed and sprints right past Juhan and Lizzie. Ignoring Juhan as he calls her name, her eyes sparkle with excitement as she rushes straight for the meat bucket. She climbs right onto a wooden bucket, enthusiastically hugging the hanging cured meat and cheering. Watching the child's innocent excitement brings a bright, genuine laugh from Juhan. It fuels his determination, and he resolves to work hard at hunting that day to keep their pantry full. Later, Juhan heads out into the forest, carrying his heavy axe resting confidently on his shoulder. With a proper, reliable weapon in hand this time, he feels ready to take on anything, even another giant wolf. But as his boots crunch through the damp forest grass, he suddenly stops dead in his tracks. A strange, oppressive pressure abruptly fills the quiet woods around him. Completely overwhelmed by the inexplicably heavy atmosphere, Juhan tenses up and tightly grips the handle of his axe, bracing himself for an unseen danger. Instead of a roar, the quiet sound of limping footsteps echoes through the eerie, glowing woods. A figure slowly approaches from the shadows, and Juhan lowers his guard slightly as he realizes it is not a monster at all, but a human. The stranger is draped in a heavy, dark hooded cloak. As the figure gets closer, Juhan can see the face of an older man with a beard hidden beneath the hood. The man shows no hostility or interest. He simply limps right past Juhan in the quiet forest. However, the suffocating aura hasn't faded. Still feeling that heavy, unsettling pressure radiating from the man, Juhan turns his head to watch the cloaked figure walk away, deeply suspicious and wondering who on earth this mysterious stranger could be. The narrative shifts to the perspective of the hooded stranger as he investigates the sunlit forest. Walking near the rocky terrain, he discovers prominent, heavy traces of a beast's blood smeared across the stones and grass. Analyzing the scene, he deduces that for blood tracks this obvious to remain, the creature involved must have been incredibly massive. He begins to move forward, his mind racing to piece together the puzzle. Based on his observations over the last several days, he had assumed Juan was a complete amateur, a man who didn't even know how to properly swing an axe. But as he follows the trail, the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. He stops before another massive blood stain, his eyes narrowing in pure disbelief. That giant, who looks completely ignorant about hunting, actually killed a massive beast? He shakes his head. It defies logic. Even a professional hunter would find it nearly impossible to take down such a creature alone, and he did it unarmed. Driven by a need for the truth, he pushes forward, determined to verify the impossible. The narrative then returns to the moment the hooded man confronts Juhan. They stand face to face in a heavy atmospheric silence. However, the stranger isn't looking into Juhan's eyes. His sharp gaze is locked onto Juhan's exposed forearms. Judging by the shape of the scars, those are unmistakably wolf bites, deep and violent. The surface of the skin has already knit itself back together. If the wounds were truly that severe, infection and a lethal fever should have set in by now, and at that depth, the muscle and blood vessels should have been shredded and the bone exposed. Juhan shouldn't even be able to lift his arm, yet he stands there perfectly fine. The more he analyzes the situation, the more the stranger's suspicion turns into a startling realization. There is only one logical conclusion left to draw. There's only one possibility, he concludes inwardly. Could this man be a mage, and a very rare one at that? He knew that mages existed, rare beings that ordinary folk might go an entire lifetime without ever seeing. If this man truly is a mage, he thought, a twisted, unsettling smile spreading beneath the shadows of his hood, then the opportunity has finally come. His eyes burned with a cold, predatory light as he whispered a word he thought he'd never utter again. Revenge! A chance he believed would remain out of reach until the day he died. Bruh is definitely related to that Santa with the creepy smile. There's no other explanation. Across from him, Juhan felt a heavy wave of unease. He watched the stranger warily, his mind racing with a single question. What kind of person is he? The old man began to recount his past. He spoke of his youth, a time when he was vigorous and full of ambition. He explained that in this land, serving as a forest keeper for a noble often meant an obligation to the battlefield, but it also offered a path to becoming a lord's retainer. He had left his father behind, wandering from village to village with a simple dream, to become a master of the mountains and an independent hunter. Eventually, he found his place as a keeper for a village situated on a mountain overflowing with abundance. The only flaw was a lack of firewood. Because the commoners were allowed to gather wood in the Lord's forest, people had to venture deeper and deeper into the terrain. Back then, he thought it was a gift, a chance to learn the mountain better than anyone else. He never stopped to wonder why the villagers only gathered their wood from the shallowest parts of the slopes. His tone turned ice cold as he reached the turning point of his life. A forest keeper must have all 4 limbs intact to serve their lord. Right before his official contract could be finalized, he suffered a catastrophic injury that left him rejected and broken. He never could have anticipated that goblins were living within those mountains. The hatred in his voice was now impossible to mask. He spoke of the horrors the village had hidden, how goblins kidnapped women to breed their offspring, and how that specific peak had become infamous as the Goblin Village. Everything had been taken from him. His career, his future, and his dignity were thrown into ruin. For decades, he lived a wretched existence, enduring the presence of the very villagers who had lured him into that trap by hiding the truth. He lived for only one purpose, an obsession with vengeance against the bastards who destroyed his life. He looked at Juhan's hand, at the wounds that heal before they could even scar, and he saw his weapon. This man, he can do it. The narrative returns to the present, the old man's gaze fixed firmly on Juhan. Beneath the shadow of his hood, his mind is a whirlwind of calculation. He catalogs Juhan's assets, an enormous frame, monstrous strength, and that absurd, near-instantaneous healing ability. To the old man, Juhan isn't just a man, he is a weapon waiting to be forged. He knows the peace of the forest is an illusion. Deep within the mountain, the goblins are hiding, biding their time. He knows that once they run short of women, they will descend upon the village once again. Before that happen, he wants to turn this bastard into an exceptional hunter. But the old man is cunning. He resolves to keep the location of the goblin den a secret until a formal contract is signed. He knows that once the papers are inked, a binding force will take hold, ensuring Juhan cannot simply run away when the true horror of their task is revealed. As Juhan bows his head in a gesture of basic respect, the old man's caution doesn't waver. He notices that even in a polite greeting, Juhan's center of gravity remains shifted backward, the stance of a man ready to spring into action. He's smiling, the old man observes, but he hasn't lowered his guard for a second. Realizing Juhan is far more perceptive than he looks, the old man finally speaks. From today onward, I'll pass everything I know on to you. You'll become a fine hunter. Mijinwu was left in a state of quiet confusion, unable to fathom why this mysterious stranger is suddenly so invested in his tutelage. The next morning arrives far too quickly. Juahoun stirs from his sleep with a groggy mutter, feeling as though he'd only closed his eyes for a second. Inside the warmth of the cottage, the smell of grilling meat fills the air as Lizzie and Dorothy prepare breakfast. As Juahoun readies himself for the day, he glances through an open window and spots a familiar silhouette. The hooded man is already standing outside, waiting. Juan's expression immediately tightens with caution. He deliberately avoids inviting the stranger inside. He has no intention of letting a man like that get comfortable entering a home where Lizzie and Dorothy are alone. Outside, the old man offers a faint smile, but to Juan, it feels profoundly unsettling. Seriously, Juan thinks, a bizarre memory from his past life flashing through his mind. That smile looks exactly like an HR manager's during salary negotiations, awfully suspicious. Despite his misgivings, Juan recognizes that the old man is at least attempting a facade of politeness. He decides that if the old man is willing to teach, he is willing to learn, if only to better protect his new home. Behind him, Lizzie calls his name. Juan turns, his sharp edges softening as he looks at her. She is carefully packing a lunchbox for him, acting every bit the devoted wife. She's really trying her best, he thinks warmly, a genuine smile touching his lips. She's adorable. However, the peaceful departure is interrupted. Little Dorothy, who had been silently watching her mother, suddenly realizes Juhan is leaving. With a burst of energy, she scampers toward the door, her tiny hands reaching out as if to bar his way and keep him from the dangers waiting in the forest. Lizzie quickly presses the lunchbox into Juhan's hands, her movements hurried and slightly nervous. Hurry, you need to go quickly, she urges, before adding a soft, wifey reminder. Make sure you eat properly. Watching the two of them, this woman and child who care for him so sincerely, Juhan feels a surge of unfamiliar warmth. It's a quiet realization that settles deep in his chest. Having a family that looks after me really is something wonderful. Lizzie gazes at him, her eyes clouded with an unspoken worry. Come back safely, she says. Juhan catches the weight behind the words, interpreting them as a prayer for his protection. When she repeats it again, more desperately this time, he finally offers a small, reassuring smile. I will. Even little Dorothy joins in, her tiny voice piping up to bid her father a safe return. Juhan's heart softens completely as he looks at them. My suddenly acquired wife and daughter, he thinks, are just too adorable. It makes the prospect of leaving them for the day almost painful. However, the duty of the hunt calls. The scene shifts to the deep forest, where the hooded elder leads the way with a tireless, steady pace. Juhan follows behind, but as the minutes stretch into hours, his suspicion grows. How long have we been walking, he wonders, wiping sweat from his brow. What exactly is he trying to show me that requires this much distance? Finally, the old man comes to a sudden halt in a small clearing. He speaks in that strange, gravelly tongue that is so difficult to parse, but Juhan has learned to listen to the intent behind the sounds. Is he telling me to look at the ground? Juhan shifts his gaze downward, focusing on the soil where the elder has been walking. As he studies the marks left behind in the dirt, his eyes widen and his expression sharpens into one of pure focus. That old man, Juhan realizes, his breath hitching. His footprints are strange. Impressed by the old hunter's footwork, wondering if it is some kind of special technique like a 1,000-pound step or an earth-shattering stomp. Deciding that he needs to watch closely and copy the movements exactly if he wants to learn, he awkwardly tries to mimic the steps along the forest trail. The old hunter looks back, noticing his efforts, and gives a knowing smile. The old man then officially begins teaching Juhan the ways of the mountain paths. He instructs Juhan to touch the tree bark to feel the subtle differences between the trees growing on the slopes versus those on the peaks. To further drill the terrain into his memory, the mentor even has him crouch down to feel the exact shape of the ground over and over until it is completely burned into his memory. After a long trek, they stop to take a break. Juhan happily reaches into his bag, beyond excited to finally eat the packed lunch his wife worked so hard to make for him. As he opens the box, the amazing smell of the food makes his mouth water. However, the old man suddenly speaks up in his native language, sternly warning Juhan not to open his lunch there. Juhan quickly realizes the problem. The scent of a human-made meal is completely different from the natural mountain air. If he eats it, the smell will easily spread across the mountain, and wild beasts will sniff it out right away. Looking heartbroken and feeling like he might cry, Juhan packs the untouched food away, desperately hoping that this won't be the first and last time he ever gets a chance to eat it. They eventually arrive at the old man's secluded cabin in the woods. Once inside, the hunter brings out 2 wooden bows, but Juhan is immediately confused. Unlike the standard D or C-shaped bows he is familiar with, these weapons look like simple, straight poles. When the mentor hands him one, Juhan is shocked by how incredibly rigid and heavy the wood actually feels, doubting if he can even handle it. They head back outside, and the old man prepares to demonstrate. Juhan watches closely, noting that it must take a ridiculous amount of physical strength to draw a bow that massive and stiff. Yet, as the old hunter draws the bowstring back, his movements aren't rough at all. It is incredibly smooth and graceful, making it look as though time itself has stopped. With a powerful release, the arrow shoots forward and slams into a distant tree trunk with a massive, explosive impact. Juhan stands there in awe, staring at the deeply embedded arrow, finally understanding exactly how to shoot with such a rigid bow. It is finally Juhan's turn to practice with the rigid wooden bow, but drawing the string is much harder than he anticipated. As his arms shake from the immense effort, the old mentor steps in to physically correct his posture and adjust his grip. Sweating but determined, Juhan tells himself he just needs to focus. As they walk back through the forest, Juhan reflects on the lesson, realizing he has only learned the rough basics of a hunter's movements and must study and train much harder to perform them smoothly. Looking ahead, he silently vows to become a strong man who can properly provide for his new wife and daughter. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere is bright and peaceful. little Dorothy lounges happily on her bed. Patting her full stomach with a satisfied smile, she playfully notes that it feels like the delicious meat she ate is swelling up inside her. Looking across the room at Lizzie working, Dorothy realizes that her mother figure has been smiling significantly more ever since Juhan arrived. Having both Lizzie and Juhan around makes Dorothy feel warm and safe, and she giggles to herself, hoping her food digests quickly so she can eat even more. However, Dorothy's joyful thoughts soon take a darker turn as she begins to question her place in the family. Knowing that Juhan is Lizzie's husband, Dorothy wonders who exactly he is to her, acutely aware that neither of them are her real parents. A deep insecurity sets in as she worries they might eventually abandon her, just like her real father did. The terrifying thought that Juhan might only take Lizzie away and leave her behind makes her sad. Later, as she snaps out of her thoughts, she realizes she is entirely alone in the empty cabin. The sudden isolation triggers a traumatic flashback to her abusive past. A shadowy, terrifying memory of her father looms over her, violently calling her a useless girl who does nothing but eat, wishing she had been born a boy so he could force her to work. Sickened by the nightmare, a panicked Dorothy rushes across the room to check on their food supply. Peering into the wooden barrel, she sighs in relief that their meat is still safe, but her anxiety returns as she wonders where Lizzie went. Suddenly, an aggressive voice from outside pierces the silence, violently yelling, "Don't you dare lie to me!" followed by a sudden, terrified scream. The poor little girl freezes in place, staring toward the door in absolute horror. Hearing the aggressive shouts, little Dorothy slowly edges toward a gap in the wooden door to peek outside. She spots 3 armed thugs in the yard, and immediately recognizes them as the men who used to come around to threaten and beat up her father. She remembers all too well that after those beatings, her father would take out his anger by mercilessly beating her and her foster mother. Watching from the shadows, Dorothy trembles in terror, wondering if Lizzie will be okay, or if these men will beat her half to death as well. Outside, the blonde thug angrily confronts Lizzie, demanding to know the source of the smell and accusing her of stealing their meat. Lizzie nervously stammers that she did not steal it, explaining that her new husband hunted it. The thug mocks her, calling her story nonsense and pointing out that hunting a wild beast is not an easy task. A red-haired thug then steps up aggressively, reminding Lizzie that after her former husband died, they provided her with a new man so she could survive. He angrily accuses her of repaying their kindness by stealing from them and declares that they are going inside to see what she has been up to. Tears stream down Lizzie's face as she desperately begs them to believe that she isn't lying and that her husband really did hunt the meat. Losing his patience, the blonde thug shouts at her to be quiet and violently shoves her to the ground. The trio of thugs barges into the house and immediately spots the massive wolf hide. Feeling the thick fur, the blonde leader realizes they can sell it for a substantial amount of money in the city. Declaring that they have struck gold, he orders his men to search the entire place and not miss a single corner. Hiding under a piece of furniture, Dorothy clutches her dress and trembles in pure terror as she watches the intruder's heavy boots march right past her. She hears one of the men exclaim that they found the meat, questioning in disbelief if the new bastard actually managed to hunt a wolf. Suddenly, Lizzie rushes into the room, yelling for them not to touch it. Despite the clear danger, she bravely jumps in front of the precious wolf hide, spreading her arms wide to block the thieves, while firmly stating that the hide belongs to them. Alright, we're all caught up again. I've covered all the current chapters through chapter 9. Manhwa name is in the description and comments. Just a heads up, the next chapter hits the official Korean site this Tuesday, and the English translation should be out by Wednesday. I'm definitely keeping up with this series, so stay tuned for what's next. You already know what to do. See ya.